set up here. If you need to stretch for a moment as I get my computer going, I'll just tell a quick story about that Brewers trip. And that was great. It was great. It turned out that there was a photographer who took your picture and ended up on the front page of the Milwaukee Sentinel. And you were in trouble with the school. Remember that?
I wasn't going to mention that.
You were in trouble with the school. I also just learned tonight, sitting next to Bud, the story of my conception. This is true. So, Bud, what's the story? You lived below in the lower flat with your parents.
Right.
And my parents were
in the bedroom above my parents, right.
You want to finish that story? You really should.
Yeah, they laughed uproariously when they told me the story of being in bed one night, and the bed in the floor above them crashed and collapsed.
Talk about coming into the world with a bang. I have a lot to share, and I know I only have a short time, so I really want to kind of just jump right in and tell the story as quickly as I can. And first of all, just to recognize the other veterans in the room, if you don't mind raising your hand, those who have served in the military. And a round of applause for all of them. So really, the service and the sacrifice, and talking to veterans as much as I do, it's that last word, sacrifice. That is the part that really hits home for them. And here we are. This is my father in 1966, as he was drafted right out of his residency at St. Mary's. We were on the Lemoore Naval Air Station in California. I'm the little kid on the left who was probably right in the midst of that paramyxovirus outbreak, just before they came out with the vaccination. So it knocked out my hearing in my left ear. So I have total hearing loss, okay? So now you're going to start to ask the question, how is it that I could have been allowed in the military, being totally deaf in my left ear? And how did I become a psychiatrist, being totally deaf in one ear? And those questions I'm not going to answer. Except just to let you know, here's an early slide just showing my first recruitment in the Army here in 1963. I'm the kid with the diapers on. Now, there are some very serious parts of this talk, including the fact that because of the genital injuries in our troops, they now are wearing Kevlar underwear. And that's very effective. The Marines and the soldiers, as they go out on foot patrol, and I'm going to show you some pictures of what those missions are like, they now wear Kevlar underwear, which protects their genitals. And that's been a major sort of advance in the armor. And that's different than what we saw in Iraq. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between Iraq and Afghanistan. And this is really sort of the picture of Afghanistan, this young woman who was featured on the cover of National Geographic. And there's so much to say about the country. And part of it is just that's how sad it is. It's the worst place in the world to be born a woman. It's the worst place in the world to be a child. And it's just the contrast between what we have here in the States and what is there is just, it's remarkable. I'm going to just talk about some of these lessons learned globally, locally, the treatment setting, the patient population, treatment trends, and some redeployment differences between the Army and the Navy. As I went through the slides pretty quickly, I joined the military in 2001, right after September 11th. And I called the recruiter up, and I said, I'm 40 years old, and I've got a bad knee, and I'm deaf in one ear. Do you need any help? He said, well, I'm not sure. What job do you have? Well, I'm a psychiatrist. Oh, we'll find a place for you. So the message here tonight, and I'm not here to recruit, I don't get any money for this at all, but if you think that you still have some time to serve, but I think you might still have some service in your left here. Even though you failed the Air Force exam, is that the story?
Correct.
In telling the story, this part of our world needs some time to kind of get our minds around. Afghanistan is a landlocked country. It sits right between Iran and Pakistan. So you just geopolitically, and then all that's happening in this part of the world is so it's such an important part of our current era. And obviously, being a landlocked country, you begin to wonder what's the Navy doing in Afghanistan. And we'll get to that in a moment. One of the differences between Iraq and Afghanistan is that Iraq, most of the injuries occurred on the road, those roadside bombs, the IEDs. So people are riding those vehicles and they get hit by a bomb. And prior to the development of the V-shaped hull, the MRAPs that are made up in Oshkosh, most of those injuries, that the force came right up through the bottom of those Humvees. So that's the type of injury pattern you saw. In Afghanistan, there's one road, Route 1. And it encircles the country. You can see it here. So most of our injuries are dismounted. These are troops that are on foot. And where I was stationed was in that southern part, that Kandahar region right here. So this is the spiritual birthplace of the Taliban. It's hotly contested. I think they were attacked yesterday, if you saw the news. Again, suicide bombers trying to get into that base, blowing themselves up while other suicide bombers are behind them, which is unfortunately very common. The Helmand province is over here. This is where all the Marines are. One of the reasons I switched from the Army to the Navy was that many of my veterans who are Marines have trouble talking to anyone who's not a Marine. And I think there are some Marines in the room here. Dr. Stewart, is that true? Dr. Wilson? I mean, it is. So my goal was to try to get an experience of what it's like to serve the Marines, and the Navy takes care of all the Marines. So when I went over to Afghanistan, hoping to work with Marines, they were all here in the Helmand region, taken care of by the British. We were in Kandahar. This is all American and NATO troops. And this area also is the place where most of the poppies are grown. This is the highest heroin production in the world. And this was an airfield, the Kandahar airfield. This building was described as the last stand of the Taliban in 2001 when the troops moved in, the last place that Osama bin Laden was seen before he fled into the mountains of Pakistan. And part of what I'd like to kind of share is just this life on the base, and unfortunately we can't replicate the sounds, but if anyone's been close to a jet, this really rattles you. And part of our fun is kind of get away from the hospital, and that would be we'd all sit alongside the airstrip, and we would watch this never-ending air show of jets, drones, helicopters, cargo jets. And here's just an example of the fact that this Afghanistan, different than Iraq, Afghanistan is a NATO operation. So here's a Belgian jet with U.S. Navy armament on it. In this slide, you can barely see it, but this right behind the air traffic control tower is this red building. That's the Roll 3. So in the title of this program, I talk about the Roll 3. It's a NATO term that describes levels of care. In Iraq, it's called echelons of care, where if the injured are out there in the field, they're taken care of by their battle buddies and brought to Roll 1, which would be a small clinic. And then they might be moved to Roll 2, or a forward surgical team. And then those injured are moved to Roll 3 here in Kandahar. And from there, we would evacuate them to Roll 4, which is in Germany. And those injured are then evacuated to Roll 5s, which would be Bethesda, Ramsey, Walter Reed, and the VA hospitals. So that's sort of levels of care, that the NATO term for that. So the Navy follows the Marines, but in this case, we came in as one full hospital. Now this is incredible. So a year ago, we're all individual augmentees, all reservists, some active duty. We all come together at Camp Pendleton. There's about 160, 170 of us that will replace the entire hospital in Kandahar in one fell swoop. So from the corpsmen and the nursing assistants to the neurosurgeon, all the nursing staff, all the administrators, turnover. So this is one big group, come together for training in Camp Pendleton, come on in, replace everybody in the span of about 3 days, and we take over that mission. And just think of the logistics of that, turning over your entire hospital. This is Route 1, just one of the vehicles that would be rolling up and down. This is a Stryker vehicle. And this is an example of what the Wisconsin National Guard was doing last year. They had units that were clearing roads. So this Humvee, or this MRAP as it's called, has these rollers in front. So I see this veteran in my practice who's a young woman. She's about 25 years old. She spent 9 months in Afghanistan driving a vehicle like this, just waiting for this thing to hit a roadside bomb. Just an example of that, the creativity that goes into building bombs. And they can be absolutely devastating and just tear apart these vehicles. Most of these missions are dismounted though, so the troops are on foot and they're out there in the villages, they're in the fields, they're walking the trails. And it's that the mechanism now is that taking that step. So as the troop is taking a step forward, they hit that bomb, that pressure plate, it'll take off, those common entries will take off both lower limbs, and then it's possibly that third limb, the limb, the arm that's holding the rifle. So when they come into the trauma bay, that's the limb people are trying to save. Because already they know they've lost their lower limbs. So triple amputees are not uncommon in this setting based on just what we're seeing here. Very simple pressure plates, touch it, and bomb goes off. This slide I like because it shows sort of the joint operation. On your left are American service members carrying an Afghan soldier. This is an Afghan soldier too, wrapped in one of these blankets to help preserve heat. That's another way that people that were losing lives is the rapid loss of body heat. Training the Afghan soldiers to take over their mission. And as we're all sort of watching that this year, what will happen at the end of 2014. Tourniquets, this is another lesson I think that everybody in medicine knows. We have to stop that bleeding. And so all troops are carrying around these tourniquets we carry around multiple tourniquets. And they've had to go into Marine units and give them orders not to put the tourniquets on before they go out into the field, because they can cause problems. But because of the injuries, they'll go out there on their missions with the tourniquets already in place, just waiting to cinch them down. We're also using a lot of this for field medics and corpsmen, and most of the troops are trained in the intraosseous infusion to pop one of those in so you can get a rapid restoration of fluid volume. Evacuation then through helicopters and Black Hawk helicopters and care during the flight. As you see, this patient, again, another commonly taught medical procedure is needle decompression for pneumothorax. And brought to the roll 3, where they had just an incredible facility designed by Germans, built by the Turks, run by the British, and paid for by the Americans. Wow. A 70,000 square foot building that if you were inside, you would forget that you're in the middle of Afghanistan. And the training that goes on there, I think anyone who served would agree with me that it's the people that you meet along the way. That's what really makes this type of service worthwhile and memorable. In this NATO operation, we've got all kinds of other countries there serving. So Belgian doctors who come in, the Canadians were there, the Australians, and then a slew of other countries, the Slovakians, Bulgarians, Hungarians, they were all there. So that was also kind of an interesting part of the dynamic on base. This just shows our trauma day, typical day in the seeing the injured come in. Also, we know medical history advances during times of conflict and war. one of the problems with these femoral artery injuries that cannot be tamped down with your common tourniquet. So there's a number of different inventions being used now to try to stop the bleeding in those femoral arteries. So my job, just to think, so I'm not a surgeon, I'm a psychiatrist. My job is not just to look out for the troops on the base, but also really to care for the caregivers. A very important mission in Navy medicine is to make sure that we're looking out for the surgeons and the docs who are out there and the corpsmen who are taking care of these injured. Because this trauma that they're exposed to has an effect. And when I'm getting, this is, you know, we're a medical community here. It's important we show these slides to the community. Because oftentimes in this era, there's a vast difference between the civilian world and the military world. And it's easy to forget that there's a war going on over there. That's one of the common complaints I hear from my young veterans. They'll go to the local university and they'll get so angry because their peers, the students there will not even know that there's still a war going on. This slide also gives you a quick sort of summary of why it is that we're having more problems with some of our veterans coming home. And just the survival rate comparing wars over time. And with the advances made in the armor, with the advances made in medical treatment, in fact, the stat that we used was that if you got to the roll 3 with a heartbeat, there was a 98% survival rate. Now, that's the good news, right? But then that also means people are coming back with very serious injuries. And how are they coping and assimilating? And TBI, traumatic brain injury, being another signature wound of these conflicts. Navy medicine and most of military medicine, mental health, we always have a chaplain with us, they're part of our team. They have the strictest confidentiality. So if a soldier comes to me and is having suicidal or homicidal thoughts, I'm then kind of bound to tell their commander. It's much like child psychiatry, whereas the chaplains can keep that level of confidentiality. So they're an integral part of our mental health team. We joked on our team, there's a couple of my colleagues, that we felt like the human EOD team, the explosive ordnance disposals. Many of these troops being deployed multiple times, having troubles at home, having troubles now on their missions, coming in feeling like they're ticking time bombs. And our job being to help kind of give them hope, calm them down, find ways to return them to their mission, and when necessary, evacuate them home. This is just a picture of my office, and I found it real helpful to have a map of the United States. So it's hard seeing a psychiatrist, especially with the stigma in the military. So soldiers would come in and they'd sit down and I'd ask them where they're from, and they'd have to put a marker on the map what their hometown was. And then I'd say, well, if I was in your hometown, what restaurant would you send me to? What would be your favorite restaurant that you want me to go to? And then describe the meal. It's really something to see someone coming in and the sympathetic nervous system overload. And as they start talking about their favorite meal, they calm right down. So it's a nice trick to shift them into parasympathetic nervous system activity, which allows them to calm down. They're focused on the map, and they can begin to tell their story. Insomnia is the #1 complaint coming out of a combat zone. So our artillery on base is firing off at all hours of the day and night, as well as the jets coming, and landing. So people can't sleep. And then most of the missions are run at nighttime as well, using night vision goggles. So the veteran I saw today can't sleep. He's been home from Iraq for 6 years now, cannot sleep. He can only sleep during the day, where he gets, some marginal sleep. At nighttime, he's always awake, listening to every sound. So we go back to our neuroanatomy, thinking about the amygdala. The role of that amygdala is to be a threat detector. It works nicely in a civilian model where we don't have many threats, fortunately. We live in a very safe community. But in this setting, where there's a constant threat of a suicide bomber getting on, or if you're outside the wire, every step you take could be your your last step. Your amygdala's firing, and eventually it just burns out. And that's been borne out in the studies looking at the volume of the amygdala. As it increases after a major stress, then over time, exposed to this, it actually shrinks. And that's where we have troubles with our returning veterans regulating their emotions. Quickly, just some of the things that we did in helping the NATO forces. They allowed me to fly out to the roll 1s and the roll 2s, and that was a lot of fun to see the tip of the spear. Helping soldiers leave theater was a very difficult task for us. Inpatient care, and then some of the liaison with mortuary affairs, the unit that was right next to the hospital, the detainee operations. They call us over to do psychiatric evals on the Taliban that would be rolled up after battles. And we quickly found out it wasn't really for them. It was that the guards, these National Guardsmen from Tennessee, were depressed. They had to live in the same facility. They're constantly being scrutinized for the care that they're providing for the detainees. They were the ones who really needed the care. They couldn't ask for it. They were asking, so once we figured that out, we designed a liaison program for them. And then all these other multinational soldiers coming in with translators. This is the look inside the detainee operation with the mortuary affairs. Some really, really hard work that they do. Very young soldiers who have probably one of the highest rates of PTSD across all different military occupation specialties. And just quickly, some of the treatment trends I saw that in this deployment, 2013, they did not allow antipsychotic medications in theater at all. Not at all. Now, 2010, in Iraq, everyone was on antipsychotics. Seroquel, unbelievable how often we prescribed that. Now, nothing at all. But lots of stimulants, Ritalin, Adderall, hypnotics, Ambien. Boy, if we could have good numbers on how much that's prescribed, it would be something. Relationship difficulties with a lot of our troops being away from home. In this tour, we saw more Facebook complaints. I don't know if you're seeing that in your practices, but that's one of the chief complaints coming in saying, "Oh, I saw on Facebook that my wife is sleeping with my best friend." And that we almost added that to our intake form because it became so prominent. Surprisingly, not many cases of substance abuse. And this was different from Iraq, and I'm not quite sure why that was. A lot of differences between Army and Navy. That's for a whole separate talk. And then according to the Pentagon, this was driven home numerous times. The #1 threat to American troops is the suicide rate. More troops committing suicide than were killed by the enemy. And this just shows a quick graph. This is just active duty, not reserves or guardsmen. Since 2001 to 2010, this black line is the general population suicide rate per 100,000. And the red line is Marine, green is Army, and then Air Force and Navy at the bottom. It's that Marine spike that really has concerned so many people. And we see troubles with our Marines because of how conditioned they are. That mission comes first. They don't have a problem. You don't have, you're weak if you ask for help. And that's a hard thing to shake when you come home. I'm not going to go into this in great detail. This is one of the models that Care for Caregiver we're using with our staffs, the surgeons and everything. Our ophthalmologist was enucleating more eye. He had never enucleated an eye during his training or during his practice. Here it was almost an every other day event, especially for obviously the Afghan soldiers, because you had to now decide what kind of aftercare they're going to get. If it's an American soldier, we know that we're going to send them home. So definitive care will occur at Walter Reed or somewhere in the States. You patch them up, move them out. But for the Afghans, that's different. Because we're not sending them home. They're going out to the Afghan medical community, which has got very little to offer. And there's stark differences between the care of men and women in Afghanistan, especially for young boys and girls. And that's, I think, one of the harder things we had to address with our staff, all these nurses and doctors so well trained in American medical model, going over there taking care of these young kids, where later they would be found dead on the side of the road because there's no care for them. And that's for girls. Boys were cared for differently. We brought in some of the dogs from the local bomb sniffing units just to, again, allow that canine and animal partnership with our staff, and that was well received. I'm on a helicopter here flying out to some of the forward surgical teams for World 2s, one up in Tarankot, which this is the hometown of Karzai. You can see the Australians are there, and that the Australian shrinks were always, the Australians are always smiling regardless of what job they had. I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's the Vegemite, I don't know, but they're just naturally antidepressants, I guess. Now this is a quiz for you. Who recognizes this Milwaukee trained surgeon that I discovered in Bob Apache? Anyone recognize him? I don't know where he's with, I think he's active duty with the Navy now. Dolan? Nobody knows him? There's a recent feature in the Medical College of Wisconsin that he and several other medical college graduates, they kind of found each other out in this very remote Bob. So you can't talk about Kandahar without talking about this. This is their sanitation pool, which is known as the pool pond. So again, if I could only replicate for you not just the sounds but the smells of Afghanistan, you would really, then I get an appreciation. Going home. Now this is what the Navy has set up in Germany. It's the Warrior Transition Program. It's just over 1 year that it's been helping returning sailors. Everybody goes to Germany where you get a chance to get rid of your gear, offload your weapon, get a chance to get into civilian clothes, walk into the local German town for a bakery, and it's 5 days of decompression. There are, everyone goes to it. There's briefings on, returning home, how to get along with your spouse, recognizing signs of adjustment problems, how to get help, addressing any issues that you may have had while on your deployment. And I can't say enough about it. It really should be mandatory for all troops leaving theater. Unfortunately, the Army, being so large, will never have an opportunity to do this. And it's interesting, now, Air Force has a different model. You have to apply for it to be accepted. So the Navy's leading the way in recognizing the importance of how do we help troops leave a combat zone. And these are some of our troops. 20% of our military are women, and they're out there doing all the hard work. This last year, they're allowed now in all the combat roles. So we get this clash of cultures with the Afghan women and their burqas. And this is being described now, the face of Afghanistan, this young Afghan woman who had her nose and ears cut off after she tried to leave her husband who was physically abusing her. And the question on this Time magazine cover, what happens if we leave Afghanistan? One of the memorials from that Tarankot, that Afghan, or the Australian compound I went to, only the dead have seen the end of war. I thought that to be thought-provoking. Coming home, this is on Brady Street, right across from the Dry Hooch, and hopefully you know about the Dry Hooch. It's a veteran-run organization right across from Art Smart's Dark Mart on Brady Avenue. And this is a 2-story billboard that first week I was home, I saw that. So my work every day is helping.
Tragically, this is a reflection of, this isn't anything different than 40 years ago in Vietnam. I mean, that gentleman reminded me of a young guy who came in, he was a drummer. He came in talking, he was quad amputee. And the most precious tool we have then is the bulldog clamp. The bulldog clamp was for the surgeons is a vascular clamp. They were so precious that we sent a medic to retrieve